Hey there, welcome to the Jewish Adulting Podcast. Thank you for joining me today on your adulting journey. Before we get started, can you do me a quick favor? Can you hit the like and subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to this? I promise it's not a lifetime commitment, but when you don't subscribe, it's kind of like coffee without caffeine. What are we even doing here? Or like latkes without applesauce? Are we even living our best life? When you subscribe, you not only give me warm, fuzzy feelings, but you're also helping me bring amazing guests who rely on subscriber counts to know whether joining me is a worthy endeavor. More subscribers mean more epic conversations for you. And hey, if you're feeling extra generous, you can also show your support by becoming a monthly supporter at buymeacoffee.com/Jewish adulting. Whether it's $1, $5, $10, or even $20, every little bit helps make this podcast rolling. Of course, if you're sitting on a cool million or even looking to sponsor the show, reach out to me at jewishadulting@gmail.com. Also, I'm always looking out for engaging, thoughtful, passionate guests to join me. So if you want to nominate someone or want to come on the podcast yourself, reach out. Let's make a podcast shidduch.
This is Rabbi Ben-Zion Schaefer of the Shmooze.com. Jewish adulting is about shining a light on parts of ourselves in order to do Avodas Hashem with all the tools and resources at our disposal. It is an honor and a privilege to have every day to further refine our character and grow closer to Hashem. Take advantage of these opportunities before it's too late.
Good evening, everyone. This is Chedva Rose, the host of Jewish Adulting Podcast. I have with me tonight Miriam Racquel Feldman. Now, it is Racquel, right?
Yes, Racquel. Yeah, that's what I chose, the way to spell it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you decided to be a little different. We like to encourage that, and that's fine. I made my kid have his name Rafal with a PH, and he holds it against me till this day. But anyway, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and where you're from, and just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into your story.
Sure. So, thank you, Chedva, for having me, and it's really a pleasure and a blessing to be here. So I'm a somatic healer and a marriage coach and marriage and dating coach, and I also work with women with trauma and anxiety. And I have clients everywhere, all over the world, thank God, and I help empower women. I help them release some of the emotions that they're feeling in terms of marriage, in terms of trauma. And that's my somatic healing specialty. And I can just be found online. I do a lot of podcasts and speaking engagements. I'm the author of 2 books, God Said What, # My Orthodox Life, and Somatic Healing for the Modest Goddess.
Okay. So before we get into your story about God Said What, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight, I am curious to know a little bit about how you got into somatic healing. Like, where did you, at what point in your life did you decide that this is something you wanted to pursue? Like, is there a story over here?
Yeah, there's a big story. I was in a lot of pain about 12 years ago, physical pain, and I kept running. I had aches and pains like in my legs and my hips, and I kept running to doctors and to massage therapists and to chiropractors and trying to fix the pain that way. And finally, a massage therapist put her hand on my collarbone and she said, "You're empty. There's nothing there. You're completely drained." And I realized that instead of running around to different physical healers, that I needed to look inside and, see what part of my life did I need to heal. Something wasn't working. So I went to use bookstores. I started just reading any kind of self-help book and just diving in. I went on like a sabbatical, even though I had children and I was taking care of my children, taking care of my home, helping my husband with, his job. I was kind of like diving in with all the exercises. And then that led me to, I got coached, and then I decided to become a coach myself. So I went on that route of training, and then was very pulled towards the somatic healing work and mind-body specialty. So I kept going on that path, following the breadcrumbs there and getting training, and then also marriage and dating training. And so it was just like this internal um, work that needed to be done. Something needed to be fixed, but it wasn't my body as so much as it was my life, even though the pain was very real. The somatic, which is the connection between the body and the mind, the thoughts.
Right.
That was the answer.
Right. Right. So actually, I have, for all those listening who want to hear more about somatic healing, I do actually have a podcast coming out in March. Rena Reiser is the somatic practitioner, and we talk a lot more about her journey and about somatic healing. So tonight, we decided that we were going to talk about your story, because you kind of have a unique story, so much so to the point where you wrote a book about it. And so I always like to hear people's stories, especially if they have, something unique to offer that can help sort of inspire and show people how people got from A to B. Because I think people are intensely curious about journeys that people go on, because we all are on a journey. And I think many times we feel very alone in our journey, and we look for that connection, like, hey, they had similar questions, they had similar experiences, and they use this strength of character, or this personality, or this whatever it is. And so I really like to hear stories like that. And I think yours is pretty interesting, because you grew up in a secular home, but you lived in Muncie, which is a pretty religious community. So from what I understand, you moved away from Muncie specifically because there were religious Jews. Tell me about like how that came to be. Like, why would your family move away from the Jewish community?
Sure. And it's just funny you mentioned Rena, because I did a podcast with her years ago about somatic healing, and I spoke about somatic healing on her podcast. So it's interesting.
Great. Full circle.
Yes, it always is. So I was actually born in Muncie, and then Muncie, New York, and when my parents saw all the religious Jews moving in, they picked us up. And they moved 10 minutes down the road to Pomona, which everybody knows now. Pomona is completely, full of Orthodox Jews and religious Jews. But at that time, it was not. And so my parents thought the 10 minutes away was safe. There was a big divide. We're talking about, many, many years ago. I'm almost 50. I'm 58 now. So there was a big divide between, religious Jews and non-religious Jews. And I remember we would drive in the car through Muncie. My father was petrified driving through there. And he would just say they can't drive, and they're from the old country, and what are they doing? And it's completely irrational. And so he had a real distance and fear. And I would just see that they didn't have TVs because no one had antennas. So where were their TVs? So lots of distance and lots of misunderstandings, I think, from both sides, and sometimes disdain. So my parents thought, we were safer moving away. My mother's mother, she was like a babushka, and she came from Czechoslovakia, and she brought her, Shabbos candles from when she was young, and so she knew some things, but her English wasn't great, and she also hadn't learned. So we would go to her house sometimes for, she would have challah. She would light the Shabbos candles. I never knew what she was doing. Just recently, maybe a year ago, I was making challah. My mother was here, and I, said, Mom, come, let's, take challah and everything like that. And she had told me that she had never made challah with her mother, which was really shocking. And it just shows you how important tradition and doing things with the kids and passing things on. So it was really a generation skipped, because I would see my grandmother doing that, but it still didn't make a connection with the religious Jews in Muncie. I still had no idea what they were doing. And so there was a lot of ignorance, and along with that ignorance came a lot of arrogance as well.
Right. So tell me a little bit about, if I don't know if you know this answer, but do you know where your father's disdain or fear or apprehension around Orthodox people, do you know the source of that or where that came from? Do you have any ideas?
I don't No, I don't think it was personal. Like, I don't think he ever had a very bad experience with religious Jews. His parents weren't religious, even though they had come from Poland and they were not religious. And I don't think it was that. I think it was more like it seemed, it would like firstborn American Jew, and you got to make your way to college. You've got to make money. And I think it was just this worship of the rational. And religion is very, what do you can't see it. Why are you believing it? And I knew I grew up with, can't see it, don't believe it. Is there proof? Whatever. So, but and I think again, that disdain for the religious Jews, that distance that was between religious and not religious. And so again, that ignorance, that arrogance, that worshiping of the rational, I think that's what was going on. It wasn't anything personal. It wasn't anything personal as far as I know.
Right. One of the reasons I asked that is that your father seems to be from the generation that experienced the Holocaust, after effects. And so, it occurred to me that there were many Jews who were kind of angry at God, angry at the world, but angry at God for allowing that to happen. And so there was a fear of like making yourself sort of outwardly Jewish, right? Because that had not worked out so well for the Jews in Germany. So, I was sort of curious because he is from that generation. I mean, you said he was first generation American, but that the war did happen in his lifetime when he was old enough to understand the implications and what that meant. So I was just curious if that was the issue, but that's kind of where my questions.
But that's a great point, because I definitely kind of adopted a fear of being different. And so you're right. It could have been that he had that fear because of the Holocaust, even though, again, his parents were already in the States before the Holocaust happened. But I know for me, growing up, I was like a Reform Hebrew school dropout. Like that, it was boring. So I didn't like what I was learning. I went to, school with a lot of very materialistic Jews. And then I would learn the Holocaust. So what did I know about Judaism it was either boring, not for me, irrational, and then something like some throwback from Eastern Europe. And also that, you'd be killed if you showed that you were Jewish or different. There was all that anti-Semitism. And when I was on a high school exchange program to Germany, and they were all very friendly and wonderful. And I thought, let's just all blend in. Like, what is this separation thing? And then my grandmother, she, didn't say about keeping Shabbos or kosher or anything. But the one thing that she did keep saying was, marry a Jewish boy. And I just didn't get it. Like, I would say to her, like, why? Like, we're all the same. We're all the same. So there was, again, that ignorance. But I think there really was, for me, I know, that fear of being different and sticking out. And if you different and stick out as a Jew, you will be targeted.
Right.
Great point.
Yeah. So, okay. So now we have, obviously you're influenced by this behavior towards Orthodoxy. And so how does that influence, your views of Judaism as you continue to, get older and you're in that teenage phase where you're sort of, finding yourself and finding the world and learning to interpret it? How does this attitude towards Judaism play a part in your development? What'd you say?
Yeah, so it was I rejected it. So whenever I would travel and anyone would ask me, what are you? I would say American, and then they would keep pressing and I keep saying American. And then finally I would say, like, okay, my parents are Jewish, but I don't believe in religion, so I'm not that. So there was a clear rejection of Judaism, and there was a clear embracing of no one should be different. We should blend in. Jews should blend in, not stick out. And then my first conversation with this guy from college, who's part of the story of my book, God Said What, our first conversation, his mother's Israeli, so he would travel back and forth to Israel. And I said I had been there once. I was visiting a Zionist cousin who taught actually high school in Israel. And I laughed, and I said, whatever. I had never even heard of the Kotel until I went to Israel. And this guy was just like looking at me like, but you're Jewish, aren't you? And I said, yeah. I mean, my parents are. And then he said, but how could you not have heard of the Kotel? I said, I don't know. And he said, well, do you fast on Yom Kippur? He asked. And I said, no. And he's like, then you're not Jewish. I'm like, you can't kick me out of the tribe. Like, who are you to do that? So you could see all the confusion, around all. Yeah. So,
right. So it's funny though that you're like, you can't kick me out of the tribe, but it was a tribe you didn't want to be part of.
exactly.
So
Exactly. All the confusion. And what's even more confusing is like when I grew up, my parents were actually married on Xmas Eve. So there was a picture in the laundry room, and it's, that I drew in, this Reform Hebrew school. And there's a picture of like a bride and, and a groom. And there's a Christmas tree, and then there's a star, a Jewish star on top, and then some Hebrew words. And so we would celebrate Hanukkah and my parents' anniversary, on Xmas. It was like very confusing. But when I was older and I actually had kind of, went to Israel and learned some Hebrew, on this journey that I took to become more observant or not. It was at first I rejected it. When I came back from one of those trips, I was I could finally read the Hebrew because I must have written it in Hebrew school when I was, little, but never was able to read it. So again, that confusion that I think a lot of secular Jews have.
Okay. So let's get into it because I think we took a few steps forward before we actually set the scene. So
Sure.
so set the scene for me. Where are you when you meet your friend whose parents are Israeli, who, is kicking you out of the tribe? Where do you meet this friend?
Yeah, so it was only his mother who was Israeli. So I had gone to Duke University my first year of college, and then it felt too conservative for me. And I had a friend at Grinnell College in the middle of the cornfields in Iowa, and she was having a great time, and I wasn't. And so I transferred there. And it was a very, very liberal school and very small, and it was just perfect for me. And that's where I met this guy, and his mother was Israeli. So the first conversation we had was about Judaism. But then we would talk about everything.
Okay.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
So just so that we don't call him that guy this whole time, we either make up a name or tell his name.
Yeah, so his name is David.
Okay, so David.
Yes.
So you go to this college and you meet David, and that's when you have this friendship with him. At what point does David make some choices that become concerning to you?
Sure. So we had like we were involved. We had like a rocky kind of romantic relationship as college students do. And then I graduated first and I went out to Berkeley, California to continue like my hippiness and all that with some friends. And then he went to travel abroad and we kept in touch very little. But then one day when I was living in Berkeley, I received a letter from him, and it was a 13-page letter. And he was talking about, instead of being where he was supposed to be, which was Yugoslavia and traveling around Europe, he's in Israel. And he's talking to me in the letter about all kinds of things. And he's saying Judaism and, eating a special diet. And I'm just like, what is he doing? And so because the return address was from Israel, and he had actually said, call me, I'm learning in Israel and you should come. So I just went to a rabbi, looked up rabbi in the yellow pages. We had yellow pages then because we didn't have cell phones. This was in the late 80s. And I got in my car and I drove over to some rabbi in Berkeley. And I showed him the envelope and I showed him the letter and he was reading it. And he's like, your boyfriend's in a cult. And I'm just like, what? I was just, he's smart. How could he be in a cult? What happened to him? And so the rabbi said, there's these schools in Israel, and they catch suspecting college students, and then the next thing you know, they're religious and they don't want to return home, and they're keeping Shabbos and wearing yarmulkes and tzitzis. I'm like, whoa, like that's crazy. And then I said, but I'm supposed to be going. And this rabbi said, you should go get him out. And I said, what? I'm not going to Israel. I'm supposed to be going to Guatemala. I'm going to help refugees there. And he said, well, then you'll lose him forever, even as a friend. So it was a big decision. But I went home to my place in Berkeley, and I called David, and I said, what are you doing? And I said, the rabbi says, you're in a cult. Like, what are you doing? And he was talking about religion and God and miracles. And I was just like, it was so hard. And I spent a lot of time on the phone with him, and he even said, call this person in Berkeley, call this, rabbi. And I was just like, I couldn't, whatever. Anyway, we got off the phone after hours and hours, and it was a really big phone. It would have been like, it was going to be a really big phone bill, because again, there was no WhatsApp or anything like that. And so, yeah. And so I did call the rabbi that he told me to call, a different, like an Orthodox kind of rabbi. And then the wife answered the phone. I heard her New York Jewish accent. I hung up the phone. So that was that. But then I decided to go. My feelings for him were very strong. And yeah, I decided to arm myself with all these, feminist books about Judaism and, feminist Jews. And I got on a plane to Israel to get him out.
Right. So it's interesting to me. I just for a minute want to like sort of, get in about the rabbi who encouraged you to go to Israel, and who looked at, David's observance or learning, whatever he was doing in Israel as like a threat. So I think this is very interesting, because presumably, I don't know which denomination the rabbi was that told you this, right? But, even from what I understood of, conservatives or reforms or whatever other denominations there are, that they know Orthodox Judaism, they just reject it as a way of doing things. Like they just don't want to do it. So for him to say such a strong language as a cult is interesting to me.
Yeah. And again, this was the late 80s. And, I guess when someone goes through such a major change, it could look like they're capturing at the hotel, because so I guess to him it looked like a cult. And right, they have certain rabbis or certain Jews have that disdain for that kind of practicing of Judaism, the traditional and Orthodox way of practicing Judaism. And it felt maybe threatening to them.
Right.
Yep. He said cult. He saw the address. He said cult.
And there's no accidents, right? Because we know, like, even in the Torah, words are very deliberate. Words are very intentional. How you say it, what you mean. Even Hashem's name has different meaning and intonations. And there's just, so we know that the fact that you heard cult, the fact that they use the word cult, maybe he was exaggerating. Maybe he was being, histrionic in his language, to sort of rattle the cage, of the anti-Haredi establishment, whatever the case may be. You heard what you needed to hear at that time, to sort of make your decision. So you decide that you're not going to go to Guatemala. You're going to go to Israel. What's your reception like? What first of all, did David know you were coming? Was he, you did say that he said you should come. He wanted you to come so that you could experience it yourself, right?
Yeah. So we were in touch, and I did, and the thing was, he wouldn't pick me up at the airport, and I didn't know why. So I made my way to the old city, and he had told me about, I think it was the Heritage House, which I think is still there. And so, as the youth hostel, women's youth hostel. And so I went there, and, it was filled with a lot of religious looking girls. and even the one who was kind of like she was the one welcoming people in, she was actually from my hometown. So she was from the Pomona area. So that was an interesting thing. But she looked all religious, and I kept meeting these people, even like I had helped like with my suitcase and stuff, with some young people that I met at in the parking lot there when the taxi had dropped me off. And it was again the same story, is that, oh yeah, we came here a year ago, and now look at us. Now it's like miracles. So it's like I was meeting, even like we can say Hashem was setting me up to meet all these people who had been normal like me, completely secular. And then the next thing they're in Israel and they're learning and they're, dressed in the whole Haredi garb, and so I kept meeting that. And so I was in the youth hostel, and then I kept waiting for, David to come, and finally he did. And I launched myself at him to give him a big hug. It had been a long time since I'd seen him. And I come so far, and he moved away from me with his hands up.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a big shocker. And, but I had flown on Shabbos, so that's why he didn't pick me up at the airport.
Okay.
And, yeah, so that was the start of a big argument in the old city of Jerusalem, just pounding the pavement on the cobblestone pavement and arguing, and me trying to I didn't think it would be so difficult to get him out. I was just like, okay, we got to go. Like, what are you doing?
So your plan was to show up and be like, let's go. This is crazy.
Yes.
You're wigging out. You obviously need you're whatever. You're lonely, you're tired, whatever the thing is.
No, it wasn't you're lonely, you're tired, you're crazy.
Right.
And I'm going to convince you and all the rabbis as well, and whoever's teaching you this, that they're completely wrong, and we're going back to, to America.
Right.
That's
so
it.
I really want to hear the arguments that you were prepared to give. But before I get into that, I am curious if when you got to Israel, I know that you said you had been there before because you had a cousin who was teaching there.
Yeah.
But, here you were like on this quote unquote holy mission to save I'm just curious, did you ever have any like feelings of connection or anything like that to Israel? Like when you were there, did you feel some sense of, I don't know, because I know that a lot of people get to Israel and even the non-Jews have some sort of like emotional reaction to it. I'm wondering if you had any of that.
I did not, which is, I don't know why. I didn't grow up with, again, a lot of Israel pride or anything like that. I actually was in Germany. The first time I went to Israel, I was in Germany, and I was, I think I was studying there at the time, and I was also with German friends. And then I decided to go to Israel to meet my cousin who was, again, teaching there. And I missed the plane. I read the time wrong, and I missed the plane to Israel. So I had to wait a whole week. And then I got to Israel, and the first day, my cousin forgot to tell me. He was American, but he'd been living in Israel. He forgot to tell me, about sunscreen and the sun and the, dehydration and water. And so we were at one of those sites, and because he would teach at the ruins, and he would take us around. So I got completely dehydrated, really sick. And then he would talk a lot about things that I didn't know. Again, the history of Israel, the history of the Jewish people. I was really, out to lunch with that. And so it was just very intense experience. And then when it was time for me to leave Israel, I got to the airport, plenty of time, but the way the security line was, they go through absolutely everything. I got to board, to the ticket part after the security, and they're like, flight's closed. I'm like, what do you mean the flight's closed? So then I called him crying because I couldn't get out of the country. So I couldn't get in, I couldn't get out. I got burned. and then he was giving me the guilt trip about, there's so much anti-Semitism in the world. You've got to move to Israel. So that was my experience with Israel. I was just like, get me out of here.
Right. I mean, it's interesting to me, again, because like, I guess my experience with, unobservant Jews. I mean, I have family that's not observant, but in terms of like learning, so I've had some partners through some learning partners, and they're always like intensely curious about the history and the lessons. But it sounds like to you, it was totally like out of your realm of interest, experience. It just didn't seem like you connected to it
Right.
when you were exposed to it, which I think is really interesting. And obviously, again, just part of your journey, that it wasn't this like beautiful, oh, they're this land of Israel and anti stuff. Like you weren't caught up in any of that. And yet you had these arguments even about why he shouldn't be involved in this cult. So tell me about what some of your arguments that you had prepared. You obviously went there. You said you brought your books about feminism. Um, but what were some of your arguments? Do you remember them?
Do I remember them? I think they had to do with that it's like the religion is oppressive to women, the whole separation
Yep.
between men and women,
Yep.
and no touching, like what the heck is that?
Yep.
So it was, why are the women covering their hair and why are they
Yeah.
dressing like this? And so those were the arguments. And God, my book is called God Said What? Because it
Yeah.
was like, what kind of God is this? Like, I didn't believe in God either. So I didn't believe in God. So, but now you're telling me there is a God that I don't believe in anyway. But now God says all these things, it's just
Right.
like, it was so foreign. And so I even went to, Asia Torah and some of the learning programs there. They talked about codes, totally went over my head. Like, it just like, what? And this whole line, from the Torah all the way to our Sinai, it's like, I thought that was, just on the TV, Charlton Heston. And I literally walked into the Twilight Zone. For me, walked
Right.
into the Twilight Zone, studied everything else in college. I wasn't a stupid person, but the ignorance is really remarkable.
Right. Right. And that and you used a word when we first started talking. You used the word arrogance.
Hmm.
And I remember having a conversation with one of my guests, and we were talking about the arrogance of atheism, or of where they're like they are so convinced that there's not a God, and it's to the point of like I could understand having a different religion like that completely. I understand. You don't have to like not everyone believing in Judaism, okay, but the arrogance of like I know that there's absolutely no way that there's a God. So it brings to mind this sort of like arrogance around feminism, which is you know what you know, but there's so much more that you don't know, and yet there's no way that you don't know. It's a very
Yeah.
um, it's the illusion of knowledge, which is interesting. Somebody said to me, they used the word this like macro gaslighting. I had somebody on, we were talking about anti-Semitism, but I think it applies for the feminist movement as well, where a large group of the population became sort of like enamored with feminism, and how the specifically Judaism I'm talking about, but religion in general, was bad for women, and that was just that's what they believed, and wasn't really talking them out of it. So I do find it interesting that you're using feminist logic with a man. Like I could see that being more important to a woman, but I guess during that time you knew what was important to him, and you know you chose that avenue to go. But I mean, do you find that interesting that you were trying to use feminist logic towards against a man? Or
Well, now that you're bringing it up, but again, we had gone to a very, very liberal school, and there wasn't any separation. There was a lot of mixing. Even the dorms of this school that I went to, it was mixed dorms. Um, so the reason why I think I brought up the feminism stuff was that besides the fact that we had been on the same page in college in terms of everything, the liberalism and the way that we looked at the world and women, men, everything, how could he go into a religion or a cult or whatever that, stifles women in this way or looks at women this way. Like, how is that possible that this guy who I thought I knew so well, how could he support this? How could he,
Yeah.
how to live this way?
Like
It's
change sides.
Yeah. What do you mean? Yeah, like
Yeah.
betrayal. Like, what are you
Yeah.
doing?
Betrayal. Right.
Yeah.
So,
How could you believe in a God or religion or be with people who teach that?
right. So was there an element that you haven't, it doesn't sound like you have, but I'm going to ask the question anyway, but was there a part of this that was personal? Like you're rejecting not only what we knew, what we practiced, what we were on the same page about, but me as well. Like, this is what I believe. And this is, like, was it a personal, were you hurt?
Yeah. Yeah. It was very personal. It's very personal because along with this, he's rejecting me because I don't want to do it. That's the way I felt when I landed in Israel. I was like, I don't want to do this. I can't do it. I don't believe in it. What's going on? And yeah, it was very frightening. In my book, I take people on this journey with me. So I'm like the 23-year-old and they're living the journey with me in my book. And I brought in a lot of humor, and because I wanted an easy reading book. Because in the Jewish world, a lot of the books are Holocaust or dark or people going through hard things. But I wanted my book to be light, and it's very funny as I tell the story. And it was, now looking back, there's this like, oh my gosh, but it was I was in a terrible amount of fear because not only was I going to lose him, but what am I losing him to? And so it was really it was difficult. So it was personal and personal and philosophical.
Right. So you mentioned that you went to Aish, you also went to Chabad, you started learning to try to understand so that you could, I guess, know the points you needed to argue, sounds like. At what point did you start shifting the way you viewed Judaism?
Yeah. So with the learning, as I learned, and it took, because I stayed in Israel a little bit. So that was good. At some point, first of all, I remember being at a Shabbos table and I got on my soapbox about everybody should blend and, we shouldn't stick out. And, Germany and the woman said, don't you know that in Germany, the Jews were the most assimilated there? They didn't stick out. All their friends were German they looked at themselves as German first. And it was just like, it's like all of a sudden it like landed on me. It was just like, oh, that's interesting. Blending didn't work there in terms of protecting them from being killed,
Right.
So it was one paradigm shift and it's what I know now in terms of, Judaism and having that Jewish soul is that as you eat kosher and as you do mitzvahs, your soul actually can receive this learning. Your mind can change. So I was fortunate because I started to see a different paradigm. And then when I was learning about women in Judaism, when I was having so many conversations with the teachers and the Rebbitzins, all who had come from Harvard and Yale and all these different colleges and schools, and they lived like I did, and then they made this choice to become more observant of Judaism. Wow, they're sane. They're like getting to know them. They're sane. They're normal. They know what it's like from the other side. And they made this choice. What are they seeing that I'm not seeing? And then when I started to learn about women in Judaism while I was there, it was like, oh, if you put on a different cap and you see that God doesn't look at men and women, we looked at them like God, they're different, but one isn't better than the other. We have just different roles to fulfill, and there's a much deeper understanding of the separation and everything else. And so then that was like the paradigm shift. So I was able to put that paradigm shift. Well, if this is true, and again, the dating, one of the things that really was like the aha moment is that, in Judaism, you don't date until you want to get married. And then that there's this separation, there's not touching, and that the shomer negia. And I thought, wow, so maybe it does come from God, because what man would come up with that plan, I thought that was brilliant. So I started to have this paradigm shift that if the Torah actually does come from God and all the way back to Mount Sinai, like these people are saying in generation after generation and generation, because it's true. Why did my grandmother light Shabbos candles? Her grandmother lit Shabbos candles. Why did her grandma, like, it was just cool. You go back, well, there really is that unbroken chain until, my parents or my grandparents, whatever, whoever, because my father his parents weren't, didn't carry over anything. So then it was like, so if it's true and the Torah could be written by God, then okay, then that's this paradigm shift, and this is the way to see the world. So I kind of understood that. And that was a gift to understand that. I still wasn't believing it 100%, but at least I understood it from the inside out.
Right. So you're in Israel, you're having this paradigm shift. How are your friends and your family reacting to these changes in you and your views on religion?
So they didn't know about that yet, but at some point, this guy, David, his father came to get him because he actually needed to finish college, and he was saying he didn't want to because he wanted to learn to be a rabbi there. So his father came to get him. And when his father came, that was like, secular sanity for me. But his father betrayed me because his father got really into it and thought it was great. So, so I'm like, what's going on here? He got caught too, and then I'd realized by that time it wasn't a cult, but it was like, wow, it was so pulling to some people. So David actually did go back to the States. I stayed a little longer to learn and again to see if I could really believe this stuff. But again, I got the paradigm shift and the understanding, but I wasn't sure I was believing it or doing it at all. Like that wasn't even on my plate, really. And so then I went back to the States too. That's when it felt like I was kind of, and there was like two worlds. Like I wanted to be secular. I knew that, this guy David would be out of the picture if I was secular, and I chose not to do the religion. But at the same time, I felt really different than my family and really different than my friends. And they didn't understand, just like I didn't understand. It's a very painful place to be. In my book, Somatic Healing for the Modest Goddess, I actually have a full chapter on somatic healing and also like becoming a Balas Tshuva, becoming more observant and how to do it so that it's that you're careful with your nervous system, you're careful with your body and your emotions, so that as you make changes and how and what your thoughts might be in terms of family and friends, and so how to do it kind of in a healthy way. But yeah, that was hard. Got back to the States and I felt, wow, I understand this, and I understand the secular, I understand the religious or observant Judaism now, but what a painful place to be.
Right.
In between. Yeah.
Right. So I do actually have a lot more questions, but what I'm going to do here is, we're not going to say the ending of the story because we want people to read the book. And if I ask you all the questions that I have, then I won't need to read your book. So let me try to temper my my question asking. But what I do want to know is, what made you decide to write this book, and what do you hope your readers will take away from this book?
Yeah, so it made me decide to write the book because I did become observant. I live as an Orthodox Jew now. I'm Chabad. So what the reason why I wrote the book was I realized my story is very compelling and very interesting with all the different twists and turns. And I realized that, why should someone who's Jewish not be so ignorant like I was? So I wanted to bring the story to life for people so they could understand the inner, the inside of Orthodox Judaism. And I also wrote it for non-Jews as well. It actually won an award from the Nonfiction Authors Association, which is not Jewish. And because again, I wanted to this Kabbalistic, Judaism, and also about that we're going towards Geula, and Mashiach, and that's very hopeful. And I feel like the world needs that hope. So I wanted to give a Kabbalistic understanding of the world, but kind of in a fun way by taking people on my journey. I wanted Jews to be, if they were curious about Judaism, well, here it is. Here's, Orthodox observant Judaism. And I wanted to give people, hope that there's a divine global plan of healing happening in the world. And that there's a very humanness to the journey that we're on. And I know October 7th came and it's been a shock and it doesn't feel like the world's in a good place at all. And that's very painful. But, as observant Jews, we do know that there is going to be a geula, the full redemption, where there will be world peace and no more hunger, no more wars. And so that hope I also wanted to bring out very strongly in the book. And, I have reviews on Amazon, and people did say, like non-Jews did say, that it did bring like a salve to their soul. So people are feeling the inspiration and the hopefulness. And so I feel like I've accomplished what I've wanted to accomplish with the book for sure.
Right. So, where can people find out more about you, your practice, and your book?
Sure. So, my book, God Said What, #My Orthodox Life, is sold on Amazon, and my somatic healing book for the Modest Goddess is also sold on Amazon and some bookstores as well. The best place to find me is miriamracquel.com, and that's with that Miriam, but RACQUEL.com. I also, because I'm a marriage coach, so I have a site called yourmarriagemagic.com, and my husband and I also do a couples program together for when a husband and wife want the help they need. I also work individually with women on their marriages. I'm a trauma expert and specialist, and so I help women with trauma. And so it's really, again, the somatic healing is what I do. And they can find all that on my website, and a way to make a clarity call if they feel they are needing help. There's testimonials as well, and a lot of writing. I write, and I've done a lot of podcasts, and I just did one recently with Rabbi Manis Friedman and Rabbi Shais Taub, and that's Inside Out podcast with Ida Schattenstein and Rivka Krinsky. And we just did that, so that's out and making the rounds,
Right.
and so people can enjoy it, and they can come to my website and listen to it. So yeah, that's where people can find me.
Right. So, yeah, so I will put all that information in the podcast notes. So if you want, if you didn't quite grab that, or you want to see how to get in touch or how to learn more information, you could look at the podcast notes. I really want to thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your flexibility. We had some scheduling situations, but we worked it out, and I'm glad we were able to talk. This has been really interesting, and I am very curious about how things ended with you and David, and some other questions I have. So I'm going to definitely try to pick up your book. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chedva. Thank you so much. Thank you
Sure.
for that.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Views expressed by me, your host, and my delightful guest are not necessarily reflective of each other's views, ideas, or life choices. Sometimes we're on the same page, and other times we're not.